My name is Chris, and today we're looking at the IotaVX SA3 and PA3. Welcome to the Vinyl Attack. The SA3 and PA3 are two products that, while designed to be used together in a harmonious fashion by their manufacturer, IotaVX, do not need one another to function at their peak. The SA3 is an integrated class AB amplifier that puts out 50 watts of power into 8 ohms and 100 watts into 4 ohms in a typical stereo setup. However, when paired with the additional power amp like, say, the PA3, that power becomes 100 watts into 8 ohms and 180 watts into 4, taking advantage of its now one-channel setup. The PA3, which is also a Class AB amplifier, does just that. It amplifies. It puts out the same power as the SA3, and that's it. Its singular purpose is to ramp up the output of whatever it touches, and I must say, it does a fine job of it. So, in taking a look at these two products, the question often becomes, do I need them both? Before we jump into that part of the review, let's take a look at what features you get with both products, starting with the SA3. You know about its power, but something that I quite liked was what you're able to connect to the SA3 to make use of said power. With its 5 analog inputs, you'll have room for just about every component in your arsenal, and that's before you get to the additional coaxial and optical inputs as well. Not to be left out of the loop, the SA3 also boasts a moving magnet phono stage built in, and you'll find the connection to that appropriately next to the analog inputs. This can be very helpful for those of you looking to upgrade your amp setup without wanting to spend extra money on a phono preamp at the moment. Rounding out the rear of the amp, you'll find connections for a record out, preamp out, subwoofer out, an extension port, 2 trigger inputs, and a dimmer link out. While I never used any of these options, save for the extension port for the Bluetooth, it was impressive to see that at around $544 US at the time of writing, you got just about any kind of hookup you wanted with the SA3. The included remote also has shortcut buttons to just about every connection I just listed, as well as the ability to connect to Bluetooth devices you might have connected. It also contains a dedicated section for the network streaming and CD player, the NP3. I think I'll have to get my hands on one of those soon. Otherwise, you'll find your standard functions that work here like volume, audio adjustments, and dimming, which I found were much more robust than I was expecting. It has 10 different dimmer settings, not including all the way off, which is also available. An interesting workaround I found on the SA3 was that when it's in standby mode, the outside of the power button glows red. Turn the dimmer to off and all the lights go out, including the power light. Yes, this keeps the amp powered on at all times, but it's the only way to make this happen. This might be handy for those of you who like low light listening sessions. Of course, you'll need to use the remote to switch the APD or auto power down feature off to avoid the light coming back on once the power shuts off after 30 minutes of no usage, but that's easy to do under the audio settings button. The 3 other options you'll find on the audio menu are bass and treble settings, which will adjust the sound to taste in 1 dB increments plus or minus up to 10, and a balance control. While I didn't test out the balance, as it never really came up, I can say that the bass and treble adjustments are very powerful, and you won't need much, if at all, to season your sound to taste. But all of these features won't amount to much of anything if the amp doesn't sound good. So, how did the SA3 perform? Upon connecting it to the Q-Acoustics 3030i, the first of 3 speakers I used over the course of my reviewing, the first word that comes to mind is spacious. Connecting my phone to the Bluetooth adapter IotaVX supplied to me, I happened upon an old album by David Allan Coe and Pantera called Rebel Meets Rebel. While I don't want to get into the controversial cover image that resides on this piece, the song Cherokee Cry, which ironically takes the US government to task for their treatment of the tribe as well as all natives, had an incredibly wide soundstage that was impressive in every area. The sound was full and lush, and the SA3 certainly performed at a level I was not expecting, even though I'd heard many good things about this amp. Sticking with Bluetooth for a bit to see just how well that connection would continue to do, I played an underrated song from one of my favorite bands before 2 key members left years ago, Queensryche. Promised Land, from the title track from the same album, showed not only the same wide soundstage I'd heard with the Rebel Meets Rebel track, but with its superior recording quality, showed me a precise imaging that wasn't as prevalent before. The stereo guitars of Michael Wilton and Chris DeGarmo were in full display, and it was easy to separate the clear and dynamic vocals of Jeff Tate coming right up the middle. And all of this was still using an iPhone over Bluetooth. I hadn't even begun to dig into my record collection to start testing the analog side of things. Before I did that, though, I did take to my Blue Sound Node 2i and an MQA reversion of AC/DC's seminal classic Back in Black, streamed from Tidal and connected via Toslink to see what the outcome would be. This time, I connected a pair of Buchart S400 Mark IIs to the amp, wondering if the speaker's additional capability would show any weakness in the SA3's fidelity. While I dare say the SA3 did pair better with the Q Acoustics, I was greeted with a sparkling clean and clear performance by the boys from Down Under with the Boo Card. Phil Rudd's snare in particular was tight and crisp, and the pairing was able to showcase the drum's tone, something I'm quite particular about. His cymbals were bright and had shimmer in addition, and I had no trouble listening to an entire album before I knew it. Saving what I personally feel is the best for last, at least as far as enjoyment goes, I connected the new Fluence RT85N to the built-in Phono Preamp to see how well it would stack up. Having heard how the SA3 did high fidelity from a high-quality source, I put Rocket to Russia by the one and only Ramones on the platter to see if a more raw recording would hold its own. Knowing this record front to back, I would say that the SA3 and its built-in Phono Preamp did quite well. Overall, I experienced the same great soundstage and sonic performances as I'd heard before, but with perhaps a little less fidelity. I wasn't longing for the MQA recording of AC/DC, but I was able to tell the difference in sound quality all the same. That said, the Phono Preamp of the SA3 didn't seem like an afterthought by any stretch of the imagination. While you would indeed do better to pick up a quality external Phono Preamp if you're chasing the best record playback you can get, you won't be in any rush to do so, as the built-in Phono Pre here will more than hold you over with its performance. From here I connected the PA3 to add the aforementioned additional wattage, as I was curious not only what it would do to the sound, but also its ability to handle unforgiving speakers like the ELAC Unify B5s. With their 85 dB sensitivity, the ELACs are notoriously difficult to drive. With their 4 ohm impedance, however, the 180 watts coming from each channel were sure to do the job. Indeed it did. But this is where things got interesting for me. Upon adding the PA3 to the mix, the overall sonic characteristic changed. I wouldn't say for the worse, but I also wouldn't say for the better. The soundstage now just had a different feel to it. If you're particular about liking what the SA3 is doing on its own, you might not be as big a fan after adding the additional amplifier. The channel separation widened even more than before, but the PA3 also seemed to add a bit of a hall-like reverb feel to the mix. This cooled down the tone a little, and I personally found myself wanting the drier feel of the SA3 on its own for more of the raw recordings like the Ramones. This change in color did, however, add a certain zest to the Queensryche album, as Promised Land has a fair amount of verb, delay, and echo already built into the recording. The addition of the PA3 brought these characteristics to the forefront and really helped the mix shine in that regard. Connecting the other two speakers to the new setup, I found the same tonal character. While I still prefer the Q Acoustics with the combo, the reverb feel of adding the PA3 was still there. So, I'd say if you need the power to drive a tough speaker, this is a good choice. But you may want to try just the SA3 by itself if absolute power isn't something that is a must on your checklist. The 30-day return policy makes this an attainable goal, as IotaVX is also a direct-to-consumer brand. Simply email them to start the process and they'll walk you through the rest of the way. If, though, you decide to keep either of the products, you can rest easy knowing that they both contain a 2-year warranty. As with everything, though, there are always provisions to consider when purchasing a product, so what wasn't I as fond of with these two? I'm happy to say, not much. While I personally like the overall sound performance of the SA3 by itself, the addition of the PA3 wasn't a bad thing, it just wasn't a flavor that I personally cared for as much. The power button on the PA3 wasn't dimmable though like the SA3, and I found that a bit bothersome, especially if I had the display completely off on the SA3. Part of the reason I kept the display off on the SA3 was that when I was streaming from my phone, the information from the source would continually scroll across the display screen, and I found it quite distracting. Adding to that, you'll need to buy the Bluetooth adapter separately if you want to do wireless streaming in the first place. Another factor that may or may not bother you is how the SA3 displays volume. Many amps these days seem to count from 0 up to some arbitrary number that the manufacturer chooses. Here, the amp displays the volume using a negative dB system, having the number get lower as the volume goes up. This has absolutely nothing to do with sound performance, and I'm sure you would grow used to it quite quickly, but some people are weird about these sorts of things, so I thought it worth mentioning. Lastly for me was the remote. While this remote has all the features one would want, ergonomically, it wasn't the most pleasing thing to hold. The bump out at the bottom to allow room for the batteries didn't fit well in my hand, and I'd have preferred it to be flat all the way up. It can also be a bit much to look at when you're operating the system. This remote has 40 buttons. 40. While they all do have a function, I also think many of them could have been pared down to offer a little cleaner look and a little less clutter. With all of that said, what did I think of the SA3 and PA3 overall? While I mentioned that I personally would go for the SA3 all by itself, I think that you'll find it can handle a very wide range of speakers, so I wouldn't be concerned about that. I prefer the Q acoustics over the boot cart and ELAC here, as I think they just match the amp better. With a slightly warmer sound and smooth presentation of the pair, I wasn't left for wanting anything no matter what I was playing or which source from which I was playing it. If you do choose to add the PA3 to the mix, you'll be treated to an additionally strong holographic presentation that holds its own very well. Going with just the SA3 at this price point, however, I can say with confidence that I think you'll be quite surprised at how much performance you're getting. If you're on the market for an integrated or amp and preamp setup in this price range, I think you'd do quite well to consider the offerings from IotaVX. Thanks to all of my patrons on Patreon who help support this show. Thanks to you for stopping by to watch, and I look forward to next time.